You're tuning in to Wellfound's Ask a Recruiter, where we sit down with recruiters to share their advice on the hiring process. Hi, everyone. I'm joined by Edward Rodriguez, a global talent acquisition expert with extensive experience in the tech industry. Edward brings 8 years of expertise, including recruiting at Celonis, as well as recruiting at Rhino, LeafLink, and multiple tech startups. With certifications in talent sourcing, data-driven storytelling, and as a licensed project recruiter, he has established himself as a leader in strategic talent acquisition. Today, we'll be exploring our topic, leveraging data in your job search, metrics that matter to recruiters. Thanks so much for being with me, Edward.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to get to these questions. So the first question that I have for you is, what data points do recruiters actually look at on resumes? And how can candidates optimize these metrics to stand out?
I would say that it really depends on the role. For example, go-to-market role as an account executive is going to be very different from a software engineer, for example. And to dive a little bit deeper into that, a lot of folks who are applying to go-to-market roles tend to add certain data points like their sales goals and what they've achieved year over year, things along those lines, what to target they've been doing over the last X amount of time, stuff along those lines. Whereas, software engineers mainly just listing the type of things they were building out, what languages they're using, stuff along those lines. I think that most of that, to be honest, on paper is interesting, and the hard skills, I would say, are more important for a recruiter than the actual data points. The reality about the data points within the resume at the end of the day is that a recruiter doesn't really know if that's true or not. That will be investigated throughout the interview process, for a lack of better words. And really, it's the hard skills of what they're looking for, right? So, for example, if it's a software engineer and we're hiring a role that involves Python and we're looking for a senior person that has X amount of years building that, we're going to be looking to see they've used Python at X companies for X amount of years. On the go-to-market side, as another example, if we're looking for someone that is really more of a hunter getting new accounts as opposed to more of a farmer that's kind of just nurturing the existing accounts, that really needs to be stated in the resume. It needs to be very clear in order for said recruiter to really get a better understanding and for that candidate to really stick out from the pool more than others.
Thanks so much for that answer. So my follow-up question is, how important are quantifiable achievements versus skills on resumes? So you kind of touched on that a little bit, but really just like kind of emphasizing what numbers that recruiters take notice for different roles would be really helpful, I think, to know about.
Yeah, sure. So again, I think it's really more the skill set that you're really adding to your resume that's really going to stand out and set you apart from other folks who are applying for the same position. But when it comes to more quantifiable data points to put on your resume, the things that you've achieved, how long it's taking you to achieve, awards, other things along those lines, those are all great to add. They do set you apart to some degree. However, I will say that if you're going to say, for example, on the account executive side, you are have reached your target 150% every year that you've worked at X company, you're going to have to speak to me and then a hiring manager about that specifically, because it is quite an achievement, right? So it is a situation where you're really going to have to really tell us that story, and in a really great way, to be honest with you, because it's quite an achievement for you as an individual. But now that I've seen that, I have a lot of questions. How did you do it? What are your tactics, your strategy, stuff like that? And if I'm interested in that, you best believe that a hiring manager is also going to want to know more about that as well. How do we get such a talented person at this company, right? So I would say anything that you're going to put on your resume that is quantifiable, make sure that it is something that you're completely comfortable talking about, not just with the recruiter, but even beyond that.
Oh, that's such a good call out. The storytelling and contextualization for the metrics that you use. It doesn't matter if you add them to your resume, you really need to be able to expand on them
100%.
fully. So the next question that I have is, what data shows the most effective ways to follow up after applying, like frequency, timing, and response rates that actually work? So a little bit of education on what they really should be doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for full context of any person applying to any job realistically, if they don't really understand what's going on in the background, if you're applying to a role, you're one of many people that's applied to that role. And at the end of the day, you're just a small fish in a big pond type of thing. And what you really need to understand is how are you going to make yourself more sought after, and be that bigger fish in that pond, for lack of better words, as opposed to just swimming around there and hoping something good happens. I'm not saying that, with a great resume, you won't get a call from a recruiter. But if it's a really sought after role, assume that there's hundreds of people applying, especially dependent on the role, depending on the market, depending on the company. Now, with all that being said, one thing that I will say that is the biggest difference maker is being very proactive with what you do after you've already applied. So if you apply to a role, and it's something that you're really passionate about and something that you would 100% be a very strong candidate for, I would suggest that anyone in this position reach out to the recruiter, reach out to every single recruiter that works at that company, reach out to folks that you think would be on that team, reach out to the hiring manager, make yourself as big as possible, for a lack of better words, because all that effort and that proactiveness that you're putting forward now, even though yes, it is time consuming, especially from someone that is applying, whether they're more passively looking or really active in the job market, it is time consuming. But the effort that you're putting in at this point to really reach out to all these people, try to start these conversations, try to get noticed from that perspective, it really shows everyone, one, that this person is really wants to be here, really wants to work at X company, they want X role. But if you really are a great candidate for the position, it's going to set you apart immediately. The recruiter, for example, I've had people apply to roles where we opened the role on a Monday. By Friday, we had 300 applications. And then I've had candidates in that talent pool just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I see their profile and what company they're coming from. I'm like, whoa, who is this person? I have a quick chat with them. They tell me that they applied to X role. And I'm like, you seem like you would be a great fit. Let's get on the phone, right? So I didn't even have to look through the inbound applications at that point, even though I was. But having said that, they became very clear to me. It became very clear to me that they, one, wanted this role, two, were very interested in the company, and that they were a great fit. So getting on that phone call, it's a lot, I would say, especially for the candidate, a lot less weird because they know that I already think pretty highly of them, given that, we had this short conversation via LinkedIn, via email, whatever means they reached out to me on. But I would say that is the biggest thing, really being proactive and not just waiting to get that call from a recruiter or get that email from a recruiter saying, hey, we want to set up a first round screen with you, because that might take a really long time. And you have to assume that there are a lot of other qualified people also waiting to do the same thing. So you really want to make yourself stand out as much as possible.
Oh, I love that because it also gives people a way forward. I think a lot of people are aware of the influx of applications now, even with the use of AI for applications, that the number are increasing, they're not decreasing. So having, an actual concrete thing that you can kind of do to get through is a great thing to provide.
And your resume isn't your whole story. You're trying to make your experience as concise and relatable as possible to the person that is hiring. But at the end of the day, there could be a few points on your resume that you never really thought about as standout things that, a certain employer might feel differently about. And you really just want to get the opportunity to speak, to get into that first round, to speak to the recruiter, to really be able to sell yourself as much as possible. And the only way you're really going to do that is to really sell yourself before, and really shine brighter than other folks who are also applying to the same role.
Yeah, got to put yourself out there. Well, this actually leads nicely into the next question I have, which is about ATS, which is something that a lot of people want to know more about. So, how do recruiters use ATS data to help filter candidates when they haven't gotten a direct reach out that makes them shine a little bit brighter? And do you have any recommendations for keywords or formats to help ensure that the application at least gets to the recruiter's eyes, that they bring it up when they're filtering?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll kind of answer the question backwards, but if you're applying to a role, make sure that you're applying with a readable PDF and run it through something, even like a chat GPT, to make sure that everything on the resume is readable through a program like a chat GPT as an example, because using AI to essentially filter through applicants, especially at bigger companies, because you need to make the assumption if someone's going to apply to a Google, apply to a Meta, something along those lines, there's going to be thousands and thousands of applications for a single role. So they're using these types of products to kind of filter out through the folks that aren't even going to be on the fence, right? Even talking about smaller companies in the SMB space, in even enterprise space, realistically, if you're going to apply to a role, the keywords that you need to make sure are on your resume for that given role are things to be found in the job description. If in the job description, a certain company calls something a certain way, you want to make sure that you're changing the wording on your resume that is the same thing, but was just worded a little bit different to match the job description more accurately. That is the biggest thing outside of the hard skills. Like, for example, if you're looking for a software engineer and this company's hiring someone that has Golang, but also React and whatever, make sure that that's very clear as part of your skills in a skill section of your resume, but also make sure that that's very clear on each section of your experience, whether you worked at X company for 4 years and you did whatever, make sure that you're adding that there in a very clear way. But I would always make sure that if it's something that you're really excited about, that you're a strong fit for, look at the job description and try to match your resume as closely to the job description as possible without embellishing anything, if that makes sense. You want to tell the truth. At the same time, they're wording things in a certain way because it's a part of the way that they operate, and the way that the ATS is going to filter through things, it's going to be in a very similar way, because whoever is writing the job descriptions, whether it's at a really small company and it's someone like myself who would be writing out the job descriptions, or if it's at a bigger company where the hiring manager is the person actually writing out the job description, the filtering methodology is going to be the same. It's going to be based on the job description. And again, it might be a bit of a pain to have to tailor each version of your resume to specific employers, but hey, you want to give yourself the best shot, and in order to do that, you need to kind of go over these hurdles.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Just if you've done that exact same piece of experience, but it's just written a little bit differently and you use the wrong language, you might miss out. So it makes so much sense to me to take that extra time. And I think it creates a call also for candidates to make sure that they're really applying to jobs they're actually well fitted for, which
Right.
is, I think, maximize your time, put the
Yes.
effort where it counts.
100%.
So from a candidate's perspective, what data indicates a candidate is likely to be a good cultural fit versus just technically qualified? And so maybe that data in that case isn't so much a hard metric, but maybe it's something else that's on the resume that indicates a cultural fit.
Yeah, this is a good question because it really depends on the role that you're applying for and where you're coming from. So at the end of the day, depending on the size of the company, I would say there is the company's culture, but then there is a subculture to different departments within companies. That's more prominent at bigger, I would say 3,000 plus size companies, right? Now, with all that being said, if you're just to give an example, if you're an account executive and you work at a company like a Salesforce, but you now are very interested in joining a startup for a variety of different reasons, as a recruiter, I've seen this several times where I'll see the resume and immediately think that this person is not culturally going to be the best fit for this role simply because the culture at a huge company like a Salesforce and even a culture at a company that's 2,000 people, it's apples and oranges. It's not even remotely going to be the same. There's really nothing about the job that's going to be the same outside of the sales perspective. And I'm going to say like 7 out of 10 times, it's not going to work. And what I mean by that is this person doesn't fully understand what the difference is between going from a company like that to a way smaller company. And even if we went through the entire interview process and got into an offer, I make sure when I'm talking about an offer to a candidate and it's a situation like that, that I make it very clear that this is going to be a completely different environment from what they're used to culturally and otherwise, because I don't want them to make a poor decision for themselves. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out for the company that I'm working for and we hire, said person, it also costs the company, right? So it's a two-way street. We want to make sure that everything works well. But having said that, there are those 3 out of 10 people that come from these huge companies that they have the grit, the passion, and all these other synonyms that I can use to describe, that startup personality that do work. And what really, I would say, changes my perspective just reading a resume in that type of situation is not necessarily them writing a cover letter with a whole thing about I've always wanted to work at a startup, I want to wear many hats, I want to be really agile and flexible and be able to pivot and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it's them writing certain things. Usually a lot of folks have a little mission statement at the top of their resume, writing something in there that makes it very clear that, hey, I might be a great AE at a Salesforce and I've been a farmer for the last 2 years, but I have experience hunting and I want to make a bigger impact. I want to do this. At least if you're going to go through the motions of doing that, it makes it more appealing for me to have the conversation, to say, let's chat and let's see if this would be a good fit or not, as opposed to me just rejecting and saying that they're just not going to be a good cultural fit for what we're looking for.
It's really great to hear that those mission statements matter. I've been kind of pitching those to candidates when we've been doing profile review kind of workshops, emphasizing that those are helpful to, indicating to recruiters that they fit well with the company culture or their core values. Seems like that is actually still worth it.
Yeah, and vice versa. It doesn't have to just be from like bigger company to smaller company. The same concept works the other way around. If they have startup experience and they're just so used to the startup world, but they want to be in a more corporate situation, explain to me why. Why do you want to do that? Why is that so appealing to you? And make sure that that's clear in the first thing that I see about you, right? Because otherwise, realistically, if you're writing a cover letter, and a lot of folks do this, I personally don't really spend a lot of time looking at a cover letter. A lot of the time, it's very arbitrary and it is just something that they have almost like a template that they're using per company. I really more care about what's on your resume. So if I'm skipping your cover letter, make sure that I'm seeing the differentiator on that first page of your resume so that I know that you know what the difference is going to be moving to X company, and that's very clear to you, and that's something that you're really looking for.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And I suppose the little mission statement forces them to be concise and to make it kind of more direct, which must be helpful on your end.
For sure.
Okay, so my next question is, what metrics do you track to identify high potential candidates who might lack traditional experience but show promise in other ways? So maybe that's more applicable to a junior role that you're filling or an entry-level role, but I think it's an interesting question, and definitely we've had a lot of people talk to me or talk to us about career pivots and those sorts of things, and that would really help.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting question because the folks that I've seen in my career that have had maybe not a traditional profile for a certain type of role, or they were making that career pivot that you mentioned, that were very successful in the role that they ended up getting, they had more unique qualities about their personalities and how they went through the interview process as opposed to anything really quantifiable within a resume. And for example, if it's a role where they're looking for someone with 3 years of experience and you only have 1 year of experience, depending on what you're doing, could be the equivalent of 3 years, right? It really depends exactly what you were doing, what you were working on, how big was your team, how much of an impact do you make specifically. And you really need to make that clear to whoever you're speaking to, whether it's someone like myself on the recruiting side, whether it's someone on the actual team, the hiring manager or whatnot, because a lot of times when a recruiter gets a profile and yeah, it might not check all the boxes. And specifically, I think what happens most is either they don't have the amount of experience on paper, or it could be even something like on the technical side where it's they know a similar language, but maybe they don't know the exact language that is being used at X company. You just need to be in a position where you can speak to what you've done and why, even though you've had only 1 year of experience, that 1 year you've done a lot. Because to be fully transparent, like when I was at Celonis, my first 2 years there, I learned more in 2 years, in that first 2 years there, than I've learned in my entire career. And that was just 2 years. And I think, everyone that I've worked with, not just the hiring managers, but my managers, their managers, and even the people on my team. But I learned so much and I grew so much in those first 2 years that it's really hard to really condense all of that into, a small paragraph to put on your resume. It's really being able to be at a point where I'm having a conversation, for example, with a recruiter, and I'm then explaining everything that I did in that relatively short amount of time that a lot of people, honestly, even in 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, they don't even get the opportunity to do. So it's all relative, and you just need to be in a position where you can really speak to it and just show that you're willing to do the work. Whatever difference that a hiring manager might have in the sense of thinking that someone with 3 years of experience would have over someone with one, let that person know that how willing you are to put the work in, to put the time in, to exceed this person's expectations. And yeah, I think those things are the biggest things, because a resume is not going to tell the full story about your experience. You really need to be in the position to sell yourself at the end of the day. And 1 year at one place can mean one thing, and 5 years at another place can mean the same thing, right? So it really depends on your situation, but you're not going to be able to really tell that story in your resume fully. You're going to need to have these types of conversations.
That makes so much sense, to emphasize that you need to be able to tell your story fully, not just quantify it by years or what have you. Very cool. So my next question is about how has data-driven recruiting changed and how candidates get noticed, and especially in comparison to more traditional hiring methods. And maybe just to add on to that, AI is obviously booming and there's a lot of different AI recruiting tools now too. So how is it changing, in the current landscape?
I think it's really split into two ways. From an individual recruiter perspective, especially on the AI side, it's making our lives easier. It is, as we already mentioned, filtering through candidates, making our applicant pools smaller, but only with folks that are actually, would be considered solid candidates for whatever opening there might be. And things along those lines that really help from a process perspective on the recruiter side, but really gearing this more towards the candidate's experience. I would say that data is helping us target the best pools of candidates, especially post-COVID. I think one of the biggest things that came from COVID, one of the biggest things that's been a positive thing that's come from COVID is we all became remote for a while, some forever, some hybrid forever. And when you're starting to look at roles and now opening them based outside of just where your office may be, it really opened up a pool And I've had several situations where a hiring manager wants to hire X amount of people. Let's just say it's like 80 people, which is actually a true story, that they wanted me and my counterpart at the time to hire 80 people out of our Raleigh office. And it was a very specific profile. They were looking for Big Four consultants. And we already knew as soon as he was saying this, when we were kicking off the role, that this is not going to work. Like, there's no possible way that we're going to get these 80 hires by the end of the year, especially because we knew the presence that Big Four had in the Raleigh area, which was relatively small. And on top of that, we looked at the profile for other roles. So it wasn't just this role that we were targeting, that profile, it was several other ones. So we really exhausted these pools. We would have had to have reached out to the same candidates that maybe we just reached out to 3 months ago about a different role. And we just knew it wasn't going to happen. Like, there's just no possible way. And so what we did is we ended up pulling things like LinkedIn's talent mapping, essentially, to really see where the pool of candidates actually exists that fit this profile. Found out that, like, outside of New York, where New York is very expensive, Chicago had a very big presence. The cost of living and also what they were paying these consultants in Chicago was less than New York, more than Raleigh, but it was an untapped pool that we hadn't even sent a message to, like, at least even like a single candidate there. So we really put all this information forward to the hiring manager and told them, hey, listen, if you really want to hire this many people and it's because you have clients coming in and whatnot, we need to open this up to Chicago if we want to even come close to this target. And that's what we did. And we hired like 30 people within the first 3 to 4 months. And we never even closed the Raleigh situation. Now we were still working on that. We hired a few people from Raleigh, but the majority of them came from Chicago. And it just opened up, some great people that are still at the company that we would have never have gone to had we not have had this data, had we not have been able to present this data to these managers. And it's really making things a lot more flexible for the candidate at the end of the day. Like, there are just folks out there who are so, whatever their circumstance might be, they need to be remote, right? And a lot of companies are more open to that. And even if you're negotiating with a company and you're at an offer stage with a company and you want certain things, like, there is a lot of data out there that you're able to really present to these companies and say, hey, I want this because of this reason, and here is the data behind it. It's really, really hard to get in a situation, to be a recruiter or even a hiring manager or even someone on finance that is approving these offers, to get data in front of them and then say no at the end of the day. It's incredibly tough, because if they're making a strong case and they're presenting the data to you, it's almost like, well, we got to, give them a round of applause and then kind of adjust this offer a bit for them. They had some great points, and we really want to hire them. So they brought those points, and now we have to make those concessions most likely. So it's really, I would say in general, post-COVID, especially using these data points, not just from the recruiting side, but also from the candidate side, has made a big difference than before, in like 2019 and before.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love just hearing about how data paints this picture. It's just so illustrative and powerful in the way that you described it. Very cool to hear about. The next question I have is about what data points suggest someone might be open to new opportunities, even if they haven't actually applied. So when you're sourcing for candidates and reaching out to people who aren't sending those to you, and maybe this is for more niche roles, what is it that you're looking for that might help you think that might be a little bit more successful than another person?
Yeah, I would say outside of, on their LinkedIn saying something, having that banner that says open to work, which obviously makes it very obvious that they're looking for something. I would say the years of experience at their current employer. If they're at a startup company, I would say 2.5 years. That's really the point where most people start to look elsewhere. Not saying that they necessarily leave, but they start to look elsewhere. And at a bigger company, I would say it's closer to that 3.5, 4 year mark. And if someone's been at a company for longer than that has been pretty stagnant in their role, it's another indicator as well. It's very different if you've been at a company for 10 years and had like 4 or 5 roles at that company within those 10 years, that they're probably not going to leave, but also definitely worth reaching out. Like maybe they are looking because they just want a new environment, a new challenge at the end of the day, something that they're not used to, get out of their comfort zone, for example. But I would say really it's the time that they're spending at their current employers. And, I would say being at a smaller company, definitely in the startup space, that 2.5 years, you've probably done a lot. You've probably put a lot of hours in, again, have worn many hats, and you might be in a mood to try to experience something different elsewhere. Maybe you think that you are in a position where you could be a level up at a different company. Maybe the company has grown significantly in those 2.5 years and you want to go back to something smaller, right? But I would say really it's the amount of years, and it changes between bigger companies and smaller companies, but those would be strong indicators of, yeah, this person would probably want to leave, especially if they have been in the same position for a while and they haven't got the growth that they are most likely looking for. They're probably going to be open to at least having a conversation and hearing me out.
Oh yeah, that makes so much sense. That really adds up for me. The next question I have is, what surprising metrics or data points have influenced your decision to hire or reject a candidate that job seekers might not realize? And maybe like an extension to that question is sort of, what do you wish candidates knew that they're kind of doing wrong when they're applying? Like, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Yes.
Bring it on.
My first example is just specific to New York or New York, Colorado, and a few others where the employer needs to post the salaries on the job postings. Don't just, if the application's asking you for what your comp requirements are, don't just put the highest number in that band. Just don't do it. There's no point of doing it. Be realistic. We're going to get in the conversation. I'm going to look at your profile. I'm going to roughly know how much you're making because we probably hired someone just like you from a very similar company, if not the same company. So you're not going to fool me. And we have software and there's companies that give us this, compensation data. So we know what we're working with. And I'm going to know if you just put that number because it is the highest number in that band that we had to post. And I'm going to know that's 40% more than what you're already making. So there's really no point to doing that. I'm going to be very transparent in the phone call with you to say, hey, just given the amount of experience that you have, we're not going to be able to get to this number. And the thing is, 9 out of 10 times, they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. So for me, it's just don't even do that. Just realistically say how much. And if that number, if 15% more of what you're making is below the bottom of the band, put the bottom of the band. There's something that hurts there. It really adds up at the end of the day to say, oh, this person's, reasonable, for a lack of better words. That's really specific. But aside from that, I would say like a few other things. If you're getting into an offer stage with a certain company, yes, 9 out of 10 times a company is going to give you an offer. Your first instinct is to negotiate and, ask for more. You're probably, if you want $10,000 more dollars, if you want $5,000 more dollars, you're probably going to ask for 10, knowing that we would split the difference most likely. But don't think that you know more about this than we do. I had several situations where candidates think that they are playing this game that I have not played already 13 times this week, right? So it's a situation where you're not going to win. You're not going to win in the sense of you're not going to outdo me in this negotiating situation because I do this for my job and you don't. And you haven't gone through the motions as often as I have, and you haven't had to deal with different types of personalities and what people are asking for the way that I all other recruiters have in our experience. So don't put yourself in a situation where at the end of the day you're shooting yourself in the foot, because if you really want to roll a certain position and you're just trying to get the most amount of money out of the company, I'm going to see through that immediately. I already know roughly how much you're making. So I'm going to know that if I gave you a strong offer, like I'm going to know that, you know? So at the end of the day, if you're going to then negotiate to get way more than what I offered you, just it's a bad signal to me. I'm then going to tell the hiring managers, and they might change their mind. They might say like, "Hey, this person isn't the person that I thought they were." Right? It's okay to negotiate, but don't get too crazy with the amount of money that you're asking for, or maybe certain concessions that you're asking for, because it's the difference between you getting the role and you not getting the role. Because we can always rescind the offer. There's no situation ever where we cannot rescind an offer. So you have to play this game in a way where you know that you're asking for something legitimate, something that you deserve. And if the whole time you felt that I'm going to really prove my point because I throughout the interview process and make sure that they know I'm the best candidate around so that I can ask for the most amount of money, that's never going to really work that way, because people in this space are going to look at offers from an experience standpoint and market value. So if that's all in line with what you're asking for, amazing. We're never going to get into a dispute here, right? But if you actively know that what you're asking for is out of that, then it's just pointless. Like, don't go in that direction. At the end of the day, it's just hurting you and your stock. And you don't want to be in a position where the place that you really wanted to work at now isn't really serious about considering you for the role.
Sounds like that's also a call for them to do the data work, make sure that what they're asking for is really in line with could really be.
I mean, I'll also say one other point to that is that your market value is whatever the market is willing to pay for you, right? So it's a situation where it's an average that we're kind of looking at, and it's just saying that a bunch of people in this role are across in this specific New York market, for example, in a specific type of industry for this type of role, they're making X amount of dollars across the board. But that doesn't mean that some company isn't willing to pay you more money. Mm-hmm. And it's really up to you. If you really want to test the market to that degree to really see what you're really worth, that's on you. Be my guest. But at the end of the day, you should know roughly what you're worth. I mean, I think most people, you have enough conversations, you talk to other peers, whether it's at your own company or at other companies that have similar roles, and, you'll have these conversations, and, most people are pretty candid about, I make X amount of dollars or whatnot, and it might make you feel a way where your current employer is undervaluing you, and now you're looking for something else. But you should know what your market value is on, an average, from an average perspective. But at the end of the day, your market value is whatever a company is willing to pay you. It's just kind of like in sports, right? If a team's really willing to pay you a bunch of money, hey, that's what you're worth. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. So don't ever count yourself out, but you should know what you should be making.
I think that maybe people are a little bit less informed about how to look up what their market rate might be and to go into those questions. And I think asking peers is a really great one. And then also like considering company scale and that kind of stuff to look up what is being posted, what are the salaries. It's actually really helpful that some of those states have mandates, and Wellfound has a mandate also to encourage companies to post their salaries, which I think is really helpful. So take a look at Wellfound. That could be a really good resource to kind of be more informed about what your role might be worth. Yeah, that's great. So my last question, and we've done great on time, is a question I'm kind of just asking for fun to all recruiters that I'm talking to now. And that is, what is your favorite interview question to ask and why? It's a little bit off topic.
Yeah, no. My favorite interview question by far is the following, which is, what is going to get you out of bed in the morning? Like, what is really going to get you pumped to get up and either log into your computer, go to work, whatever it may be. And the reason that that is by far my favorite question, and I realistically, I basically, it's the first thing after introducing myself and kind of going through how this interview is going to be formatted and what I'm going to ask, that type of stuff. That is like the first question I actually ask, because at the end of the day, their answer is extremely telling. And I can tell, and I can basically save myself time, save them time if we are not aligned from the get-go. You know, if I'm working at a really small startup and their primary motivator, what's really going to get them excited, is they're looking for more work-life balance, and I know that it's just completely not the reality of what it's going to be like working at this company, I can just tell them right then, hey, like I'll let them finish what they're saying, but then at the end of the day, I'll tell them, hey, this is not going to be good for work-life balance. I'm not trying to deter you, but I'm just saying that I want to be real with you. You know, people put in hours here. It might be more similar to what you're currently doing right now. So if work-life balance is what you're looking for, this is not going to be it. But on the other side of it, if what they're like, this happened to me all the time the last few years, where folks from bigger companies, one of their biggest motivators was one of their biggest motivators was to say something along the lines of they're looking for more ownership of something, and they want to be exposed to different things, and they want to learn faster. So I can save myself, 25 minutes and them saving themselves 25 minutes as well if I know from the get-go we're just not aligned in regards to what this role can really look like for them. But it's also a different question from asking them, why are they looking to leave their current employer? It's one thing for someone to say, I'm looking to leave X employer because of the work-life balance. Great. That's one thing that is on the checklist. But tell me why outside of that, like what's going to get you excited? That's why you want to leave. But what is really going to get you excited in the next phase? Like if your thing is, I really want to work with AI and we're an AI company, great, awesome. But if we don't use AI at all, then all right, well, I got to tell you, hey, this might not be the best fit, or like whatever it might be. But I think you understand where I'm going with that, where them explaining in their own words what motivates them the most and what's going to get them excited, because you want to be excited when you go to work. You want to get up and be in a good mood and like be ready to really seize the day. And you want to make sure that at whatever place you're going to, you're going to experience all of that. And I want to make sure that we're aligned from the get-go. I don't want you to spend any time during this interview process. It could be, a 3-step interview process. It could be a 6-step interview process. You could be putting a challenge at some point. I don't want you to get to any of that if we're not going to be aligned at the end of the day. So I want to know from the get-go what you're really looking for and to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love how it, focuses in on what someone's passion is versus what their frustration might be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's been really enjoying hearing how recruiters get so passionate about like finding the right fit, making the right match between the company and a candidate. I feel like everyone lights up talking about that part.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, this was great, Edward. I really enjoyed and definitely learned a lot from hearing your answers to our questions. Thanks so much for helping us with this.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to Why Work Here. Ready to find your next role or discover top talent? Visit us at wellfound.com.